So this is chapter 9. And so the CPS process, kind of this thing that we're doing of trying to really drill down on areas that have some complexity to it. Are ideas solutions? Are ideas solutions? What do you think about that, Jalen?
They can be.
Okay, they can be, so there's some potential. So are you saying no, they're not? In general, is it fair to say, if we look at that as a yes or no question?
I'll probably say yes.
Probably say yes, ideas are solutions.
Yeah.
Anybody say no? Ricardo?
Well, you can have an idea that you think is a solution, but when you try to do the work of a solution.
Okay. So which one seems more broad, ideas or solutions? Ideas are probably right. You could have multiple ideas for something to try to, a problem you're trying to solve. So I wanted to kind of start off thinking about that. So read that definition for idea. It's going to take a little bit more, if it's a complex problem, to kind of formulate a full solution. And so we've got this ideational thinking, one of those weird things. What effective skill is helpful with generating ideas? What the heck's effective? A-F-F-E-C-T-I-V-E. Effective. Who remembers that from some previous stuff we did? What was the idea of an effective skill, or what does it mean to be effective? All right, let's see. Ricardo, number between 3 and 7.
5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, yeah, wait. Then it's Gavin, isn't it? So I'm sorry. Yeah. All right. Sorry, really. I was trying to get the Guatemala thing going there, but I kind of failed. So effective, what is the meaning of effective? So if you can take a guess, you might be wrong, who cares? Making things happen. No, that would be probably the effective, right? If you're an effective person, like we did with the law of the lid. So what would affective be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Gabe, what's your thoughts on affective? Cameron? Feelings, emotions, attitudes, right? So we kind of, if we can put ourselves into a happy place, maybe, right? Are we more likely to come up with fresh ideas if we can have a positive outlook on something, right? As opposed to being in a grumpy mood, right? So, I just don't feel like it. I'm ticked off that I didn't get to do this, or my girlfriend broke up with me, or whatever the case is, then that might not be the right affective mood to be generating new ideas and fresh things, right? So that's part of what we're thinking of here with this. So we've got ideas, original mental images, playfulness, freely toying with ideas. So pull out your papers and get ready to take some notes here. This is a TED Talk.
As an elementary teacher, I am constantly writing. Something that has helped me pick up the pace is Grammarly. Grammarly is a digital writing assistant that helps you.
You know what? I've just learned to not use Explorer, but this computer always goes to Explorer first. I'm going to do this.
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatically correct.
So here we go, a flyby at play. It's got to be serious if the New York Times puts a cover story of their February 17th Sunday magazine about play. At the bottom of this, it says it's deeper than gender, seriously but dangerously fun, and a sandbox for new ideas about evolution. Not bad. Except if you look at that cover, what's missing? You see any adults? Well, let's go back to the 15th century. This is a courtyard in Europe, and a mixture of 124 different kinds of play, all ages, solo play, body play, games, taunting, and there it is. And I think this is a typical picture of what it was like in a courtyard then. I think we may have lost something in our culture. So I'm going to take you through what I think is a remarkable sequence. North of Churchill, Manitoba, in October and November, there's no ice on Hudson Bay, and this polar bear that you see is 1,200-pound male. He's wild and fairly hungry. And Norbert Rossing, a German photographer, is there on scene making a series of photos of these huskies who are tethered. And from out of stage left comes this wild male polar bear with a predatory gaze. Any of you been to Africa or had a junkyard dog come after you, there is a fixed kind of predatory gaze, and you know you're in trouble. But on the other side of that predatory gaze is a female husky in a play bow wagging her tail. And something very unusual happens. That fixed behavior, which is rigid and stereotyped and ends up with a meal, changes. And this polar bear stands over the husky, no claws extended, no fangs, taking a look, and they begin an incredible ballet. A play ballet. This is in nature. It overrides the carnivorous nature and what otherwise would have been a short fight to the death. And if you begin to look closely at the husky that's burying her throat to the polar bear, and look a little more closely, they're in an altered state. They're in a state of play. And it's that state that allows these two creatures to explore the possible. They are beginning to do something that neither would have done without the play signals. And it is a marvelous example of how a differential in power can be overridden by a process of nature that's within all of us. Now, how did I get involved in this? John mentioned that I've done some work with murderers, and I have. The Texas Tower murder opened my eyes in retrospect when we studied his tragic mass murder to the importance of play, and that that individual, by deep study, was found to have severe play deprivation. Charles Whitman was his name. And our committee, which consisted of a lot of hard scientists, did feel at the end of that study that the absence of play and a progressive suppression of developmentally normal play led him to be more vulnerable to the tragedy that he perpetrated. And that finding has stood the test of time, unfortunately, even into more recent times in Virginia Tech. And other studies of populations at risk sensitized me to the importance of play, but I didn't really understand what it was. And it was many years in taking play histories of individuals before I really began to recognize that I didn't really have a full understanding of it. I don't think any of us has a full understanding of it by any means, but there are ways of looking at it that I think can give us all a taxonomy, a way of thinking about it. And this image is, for humans, the beginning point of play. When that mother and infant lock eyes, and the infant's old enough to have a social smile, what happens spontaneously is the eruption of joy on the part of the mother, and she begins to babble and coo and smile, and so does the baby. If we've got them wired up with an electroencephalogram, the right brain of each of them becomes attuned. So that the joyful emergence of this earliest of play scenes and the physiology of that is something we're beginning to get a handle on. And I'd like you to think that every bit of more complex play builds on this base for us humans. And so now I'm going to take you through sort of a way of looking at play, but it's never just singly one thing. We're going to look at body play, which is a spontaneous desire to get ourselves out of gravity. This is a mountain goat. If you're having a bad day, try this. Jump up and down, wiggle around, you're going to feel better. And you may feel like this character, who is also just doing it for its own sake. It doesn't have a particular purpose, and that's what's great about play. If its purpose is more important than the act of doing it, it's probably not play. And there's a whole other type of play, which is object play. And this Japanese macaque has made a snowball, and he or she's going to roll down a hill and throw it at each other. But this is a fundamental part of being playful. The human hand in manipulation of objects is a hand in search of a brain, the brain is in search of a hand, and play is a medium by which those two are linked in the best way. JPL, we heard this morning, JPL is an incredible place. They have located two consultants, Frank Wilson and Nate Johnson, who are Frank Wilson's a neurologist, Nate Johnson is a mechanic. He taught mechanics in a high school in Long Beach and found that his students were no longer able to solve problems. And he tried to figure out why, and he came to the conclusion quite on his own that the students who could no longer solve problems such as fix cars hadn't worked with their hands. Frank Wilson had written a book called The Hand. They got together, JPL hired them. Now JPL and NASA and Boeing, before they will hire a research and development problem solver, even if they're summa cum laude from Harvard or Caltech. If they haven't fixed cars, haven't done stuff with their hands early in life, played with their hands, they can't problem solve as well. So play is practical, and it's very important. Now, one of the things about play is that it is born by curiosity and exploration, but it has to be safe exploration. This happens to be okay. He's an anatomically interested little boy, and that's his mom. Other situations wouldn't be quite so good, but curiosity, exploration are part of the play scene. If you want to belong, you need social play. And social play is part of what we're about here today, and is a byproduct of the play scene. Rough and tumble play. These lionesses, seen from a distance, look like they were fighting. But if you look closely, they're kind of like the polar bear and husky. No claws, flat fur, soft eyes, open mouth with no fangs, balletic movements, curvilinear movements, all specific to play. And rough and tumble play is a great learning medium for all of us. Preschool kids, for example, should be allowed to dive, hit, whistle, scream, be chaotic, and develop through that a lot of emotional regulation and a lot of the other social byproducts, cognitive, emotional, and physical, that come as a part of rough and tumble play. Spectator play, ritual play, we're involved in some of that. Those of you who are from Boston know that this was the moment, rare, where the Red Sox won the World Series. But take a look at the face and the body language of everybody in this fuzzy picture, and you can get a sense that they're all in play. Imaginative play. I love this picture because my daughter is now almost 40 and is in this picture, but it reminds me of her storytelling and her imagination, her ability to spin yarns at this age, preschool. Really important part of being a player is imaginative solo play. And I love this one because it's kind of also what we're about. We all have an internal narrative that's our own inner story. The unit of intelligibility of most of our brains is the story. I'm telling you a story today about play. Well, this Bushman, I think, is talking about the fish that got away that was, that long, but it's a fundamental part of the play scene. So what does play do for the brain? Well, a lot. We don't know a whole lot about what it does to the human brain because funding has not been exactly heavy for research on play. I walked into the Carnegie asking for a grant. They'd given me a large grant when I was an academician for the study of felony drunken drivers, and I thought I had a pretty good track record. And by the time I had spent half an hour talking about play, it was obvious that they did not feel that play was serious. I think that's a few years back. I think that wave is past and the play wave is cresting, because there is some good science. Nothing lights up the brain like play. Three-dimensional play fires up the cerebellum, puts a lot of impulses into the frontal lobe, the executive portion, helps contextual memory to be developed, and. So it's for me, it's been an extremely nourishing, scholarly adventure to look at the neuroscience that's associated with play and bring together people who, in their individual disciplines, hadn't really thought of it that way. And that's part of what the National Institute for Play is all about. And this is one of the ways you can study play, is to get a 256 lead electroencephalogram. I'm sorry I don't have a playful looking subject, but it allows mobility, which has limited the actual study of play. And we've got a mother-infant play scenario that we're hoping to complete underway at the moment. The reason I put this here is also to cue up my thoughts about objectifying what play does. The animal world has objectified it. In the animal world, if you take rats who are hardwired to play at a certain period of their juvenile years, and you suppress play. They squeak, they wrestle, they pin each other, that's part of their play. If you stop that behavior on one group that you're experimenting with, and you allow it in another group that you're experimenting with, and then you present those rats with a cat odor saturated collar, they're hardwired to flee and hide. Pretty smart. They don't want to get killed by a cat. So what happens? They both hide out. The non-players never come out. They die. The players slowly explore the environment and begin again to test things out. It says to me, at least in rats, and I think they have the same neurotransmitters that we do and a similar cortical architecture, that play may be pretty important for our survival. And there are a lot more animal studies that I could talk about. Now, this is a consequence of play deprivation. This took a long time. I had to get homework down and put it through the fMRI and the SPECT and multiple EEG, but as a couch potato, his brain is shrunk. And we do know that in domestic animals and others, when they're play deprived, they don't develop, and rats also, they don't develop a brain that is normal. Now, the program says that the opposite of play is not work, it's depression. And I think if you think about life without play, no humor, no flirtation, no movies, no games, no fantasy, and try and imagine a culture or a life, adult or otherwise, without play. And the thing that's so unique about our species is that we're really designed to play through our whole lifetime. And we all have capacity to play signaling. Nobody misses that dog I took a picture of on the Carmel Beach a couple of weeks ago. What's going to follow from that behavior is play, and you can trust it. The basis of human trust is established through play signals, and we begin to lose those signals culturally and otherwise as adults. That's a shame. I think we've got a lot of learning to do. Now, Jane Goodall has here a play face along with one of her favorite chimps. So part of the signaling system of play has to do with vocal, facial, body, gestural. You can tell. And I think when we are getting into collective play, it's really important for groups to gain a sense of safety through their own sharing and play signals. You may not know this word, but it should be your biological first name and last name, because neoteny means the retention of immature qualities into adulthood. And we are, by physical anthropologists, by many, many studies, the most neotenous, the most youthful, the most flexible, the most plastic of all creatures, and therefore the most playful. And this gives us a leg up on adaptability. Now, there is a a way of looking at play that I also want to emphasize here, which is the play history. Your own personal play history is unique and often is not something we think about particularly. This is a book written by a consummate player by the name of Kevin Carroll. Kevin Carroll came from extremely deprived circumstances. Alcoholic mother, absent father, inner city Philadelphia, black, had to take care of a younger brother. Found that when he looked at a playground out of a window into which he had been confined, he felt something different. And so he followed up on it. And his life, transformation of his life from deprivation and what one would expect, potentially prison or death, to become a linguist, a trainer for the 76ers, and now as a motivational speaker. And he gives play as a transformative force over his entire life. Now there's another play history that I think is a work in progress. Those of you who remember Al Gore during the first term and then during his successful but unelected run for the presidency may remember him as being kind of wooden and not entirely his own person, at least in public. Now, looking at his history, which is common in the press, it seems to me, at least, looking at it from a shrink's point of view, that a lot of his life was programmed. Summers were hard work in the heat of Tennessee summers. He had the expectations of his senatorial father and Washington, D.C. And although he had certainly, I think, capacity for play, because I do know something about that, he wasn't as empowered, I think, as he now is, by paying attention to what is his own passion and his own inner drive, which I think has its basis in all of us in our play history. So what I would encourage you on an individual level to do is to explore backwards as far as you can go to the most clear, joyful, playful image that you have, whether it's with a toy or on a birthday or on a vacation, and begin to build from the motion of that into how that connects with your life now. And you'll find you may change jobs, which has happened to a number of people when I've had them do this in order to be more empowered through their play. Or you'll be able to enrich your life by prioritizing and paying attention to it. Most of us work with groups, and I put this up because the D School, the design school at Stanford, thanks to David Kelly and a lot of others who have been visionary about its establishment, has allowed a group of us to get together and create a course called From Play to Innovation. And you'll see this course is to investigate the human state of play, which is kind of like the Fuller-Husky state, and its importance to creative thinking. Explore play behavior, its development, and its biological basis, to apply those principles through design thinking to promote innovation in the corporate world. Students will work with real-world partners on design projects with widespread application. This is our maiden voyage, and as we're about 3 months, 2.5, 3 months into it, and it's really been fun. There is our star pupil, this Labrador, who taught a lot of us what a state of play is, and an extremely aged and decrepit professor in charge there. And Brendan Boyle, Rich Crandall, and on the far right is, I think, a person who will be in cahoots with George Smoot for a Nobel Prize, Stuart Thompson in neuroscience. So we've had Brendan, who's from IDEO, and the rest of us sitting aside and watching these students as they put play principles into practice in the classroom. And one of their projects was to see what makes meetings boring and to try and do something about it. So what will follow is a student-made film about just that.
The mental state of operation in which the person is fully immersed in what he or she is doing, characterized by a feeling of energized focus, full involvement, and success in the process of the activity. An important concept in my readings is that people willingly one after another, destructive deliberately, activities that we can still remember when they go back to the tasks they laid at their desk. Very weeks. This one's called the D school design that you can literally step out of when it's over. Take the meeting off of it and have flexible learning come back to it. Because when you need it again, the meeting is literally hanging in your closet. The wearable meeting. Because when you put it on, you really have everything you need to have a fun and productive use of it. But when you take it off, that's when the real action happens.
So I would encourage you all to engage, not in the work-play differential, where you set aside time to play, where your life becomes infused minute by minute, hour by hour with body, object, social, fantasy, transformational kinds of play. I think you'll have a better and more tolerant life. Thank you.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that there may be some temptation on the part of people to look at your work and go, I think I heard this in my kind of pop psychological understanding of play, that somehow the way animals and humans deal with play is that it's some sort of rehearsal for adult activity. Your work seems to suggest that that is powerfully wrong.
Yeah, I don't think that's accurate. I think probably because animals have taught us that. If you stop a cat from playing, which you can do, we've all seen how cats, bat around stuff. They're just as good predators as they would be if they hadn't played. And if you imagine a kid pretending to be King Kong or a race car driver or a fireman, they don't all become race car drivers and firemen. So there's a disconnect between preparation for the future, which is what most people are comfortable in thinking about play as, and thinking of it as a separate biological entity. And this is where my chasing animals for 4 or 5 years really changed my perspective from the clinician to what I am now, which is that play has a biological place, just like sleep and dreams do. And if you look at sleep and dreams, biologically, animals sleep and dream, and they rehearse and they do some other things that help memory and that are a very, very important part of sleep and dream. The next step of evolution in mammals and creatures with divinely superfluous neurons will be to play. And the fact that the polar bear and husky, or a magpie and a bear, or you and I and our dogs can cross over and have that experience, set play aside as something separate. It's hugely important in learning and crafting the brain. So it's not just something you do in your spare time.
How do you keep, and I know you're part of the scientific research community and you have to justify your existence with grants and proposals like everyone else. How do you prevent, because some of the data you produce, the good science that you're talking about you produce is hot to handle. How do you prevent either the media's interpretation of your work or the scientific community's interpretation of the implications of your work, kind of like the sort of Mozart metaphor where, MRI show that play enhances your intelligence. Well, let's round these kids up, put them in pens, and make them play for months at a time. They'll all be geniuses and go to Harvard. How do you prevent people from taking that sort of action on the data that you develop?
Well, I think, The only way I know to do it is to have accumulated advisors that I have who go from practitioners who can establish through improvisational play or clowning or whatever a state of play. So people know that it's there. And then you get an fMRI specialist, you get Frank Wilson, and you get other kinds of hard scientists, including neuroendocrinologists, and you get them into a group together focused on play. And it's pretty hard not to take it seriously. Unfortunately, that hasn't been done sufficiently for the National Science Foundation, National Institute of Mental Health, and everybody else to really look at it in this way seriously. You don't hear about anything that's like cancer or heart disease associated with play, and yet I see it as something to test as basic for survival, long term, as learning some of the basic things about public health.
Okay, so to kind of summarize that, at the bottom, I want you to reflect a little bit on in what ways do you incorporate play into your life? So answer this question, in what ways do I, or you, incorporate play into my answer that question.
Talked about how, so like, my understanding's always been like when you see animals playing, like it was developing skills for like when they're adults and stuff, like if you watch like any documentaries or anything like that. So his claim is that that's not true because animals still play after an adulthood, like with the overbearing huskies, therefore it's like separated.
I don't think he's saying that it's not true, but it's only part of the, yeah, that part might be true also, but then why would we continue to see them play later? That it's, you know, yeah, that's not also. Okay, so, what did you think of this play idea? Did you buy into what he said? How many of you on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being, I guess, incorporating play into your life all the time, 100% of the time, how many of you think you would be, and then 1 or 0 or under 5, basically, this was almost a foreign concept to you, which is totally fine, right? Everybody's different. I think we know plenty of people that are so serious that they don't ever play the way he just described it, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just kind of is what it is. So how many of you would put you on a scale of a 7 or higher on play? Okay, and why is that? How, maybe part of what your answer was a little bit, you can ad lib, but why do you consider it so high? Gavin?
I really agree with that. Low, working, it's why we should be kind of low, working, play, back to work.
Okay, so having some breaks that way. Good. Other people want to know?
I feel like we're not really get to a break.
Okay. Get a little laugh, a little fun.
Kind of look at it like life isn't so serious, or whatever. You still have fun, mess around, do what you want.
So does anybody have any examples of ways that they incorporated play into the job itself as a part, rather than taking a break to have fun, which is part of it too, kind of recharging your battery, so to speak. But you got any examples where you've actually incorporated kind of play into the activity that was a serious activity or something? Let me go, Bobby.
In high school, I was a pizza delivery boy, but like I also made the pizza.
Okay.
And so the owner was like a small local pizza place, and so she had her son like there like every day. He'd always play Fortnite. When I started working there, I'm kind of like made him teach me how to skateboard, and she like allowed that by letting me take like deliveries that were near like within 5 minutes on the skateboard.
On your skateboard. Okay, that's interesting, Bryce.
So like people that I work with will have like competitions and stuff to see who can sales or stuff like that.
Okay, good, yeah.
Competition to it.
Yeah. One thing that I put on quite a few of your comments, and we still got more to go, so I tried to hold back on some of these comments, but adding a little competition into your event is kind of a fun way to add play to it, right? That kind of that competitive nature. Some of your stuff was playful by nature, so building the tower and the bag of goodies that Rayleigh did last time, and other things that we had imagining. So that was kind of by nature meant to be incorporating some of that playfulness. But you can also add the competition part. You can start to add a little bit of that playful interaction. It's kind of a friendly competition. It's not really life or death situation. So, okay, any other last comments on play? All right, so I put this up here just to kind of go back. I wanted to look at their mission. So this has the little video that Dana showed when she was here, and this is their mission statement. Education and More is a Christian nonprofit organization, strives to reduce poverty in Guatemala by providing educational opportunities for students of all ages and by helping those we serve earn a fair income. So you can kind of reference that if you need to as you look over your stuff for your homework exercise for Sunday night that I mentioned earlier. So it's in the assignments tab. And oops, item is hidden from students. No, it's not. Try to cover it. Make available. Okay. Okay, there it is. So from your notes and the presentation Tuesday, write a summary of what you learned about. Well, I edited that. Let's change that with my old project. It's supposed to be. Oh, probably because it wasn't available when I did it. Let me just edit it as we speak here. It's just a simple little. Oh, I edited that stuff. Huh. Well, maybe I didn't ever change ripples. It changed in education and more. Be sure to include a summary of what it does currently, and then strengths and weaknesses currently, and opportunities and threats for the future. So how many of you have done a SWOT analysis? SWOT. Yeah, so you've maybe seen that in some of your other business classes, especially if you're a business administration major. That's kind of a big part of some things you'll do for you in your final project or other things. And it is an interesting thing. So it's SWOT, like this: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I kind of gave you the hint of what you're doing is that the strengths and the weaknesses are currently what you did with your who, where, when, where, why, what, kind of what you heard Dana say and what you know what appears to be their strengths and weaknesses currently, so you can kind of divide them into that. And then opportunities or threats into the future, like what, so the opportunity threat thing is kind of more forward looking, and the strengths and weaknesses are more of today, and what do we look like, taking an inventory of assets and liabilities and one thing like that. So that is the Sunday night deal, and just kind of write a short little summary of those. Make sure you include those three things. Okay. Back to this. Oops. Okay. All right, so we just watched that video on playfulness. And so in our Chapter 9 Exploring Ideas, we're going to do some brainstorming. So what is brainstorming? To you now, not necessarily out of the books, but you guys have done some brainstorming or you've heard of it. So Bobby?
Ideas.
Okay, coming up with lots of ideas. Good. Anybody else want to add to that, Cameron?
And it's just divergent thinking.
Okay, yeah, it's a way to kind of get divergent thinking going, right? So come up with lots of ideas. So we'll be following our divergent thinking. So here's the definition according to the way the author put it in there. So specific things, amassing a bunch of ideas spontaneously contributed by its members. So what do we mean by spontaneously contributed by the members of the group? Spontaneous. Bryce?
So like whatever you think, you're just saying
Yeah. So what are our four principles for divergent thinking? Defer judgment, go for quantity, seek novelty, make connections. So we're doing all of that. And then, so we're going to have a facilitator is an important part of the brainstorming, which you may not do, by the way, when you and your buddies are brainstorming what you're going to do for this trip or the weekend or something like that. So we're going to have a little bit more formal guidelines on facilitating the brainstorming session. Okay, so we're going to start with 5 to 8 people, and we're going to identify a challenge. How should that challenge be worded? With the question stems, did you guys catch that when I snuck this in on you? In what ways, right? So in what ways do I, so that was the question stem, kind of get you forward thinking right away. So you have a challenge that you present to the group that might be a little bit more defined so that the people who are doing the brainstorming can be a little bit more focused on the issue. All right, so then we're going to do the divergent thinking. And so to put a little more meat on those bones, we review the divergent thinking. Don't paraphrase. What does that mean? When somebody comes up with an idea, don't paraphrase it. Why would that be part of this? Bobby?
You'd like leave out certain information that other people might stem off of.
Okay, what else?
Or like, hinder, or part of it might, part of what your paraphrase that you might help somebody else make a connection.
Okay, good. Yeah, so you don't want to destroy that. Also, by paraphrasing what somebody else has said, what are you effectively kind of doing? You're judging. You might not have thought about that, but like, oh, okay, I see what you mean. You mean this, right? So that's not what we're doing when we're going for quantity. You might have another person that thinks that. So as a facilitator or as another person involved, one of the rules is we're not going to paraphrase what you did because you're kind of judging in a way if you're trying to paraphrase what you think they said or what they think it means.
I'm talking about like you were up there and I was telling you my idea.
Yeah, so me as the facilitator, but it also goes for members of the group. So we're going to do this next week, probably Monday. But you come up with an idea, and then I, as the facilitator, says, okay, I'll write that down. This is kind of what you mean, right? So no, you want to somehow get word for word what they actually said, and allow somebody else to maybe say that. Or if all of a sudden Rayleigh's like, oh, Bobby, I know what you mean. Is this what you're saying? Well, you just take whatever Rayleigh said as another thing, right? So now you've got Bobby's contribution. We're going for quantity, deferring judgment, and now we've got Rayleigh's contribution. Maybe they overlap. Maybe they are kind of similar. Who gives a damn, right? It's just you're going to take it in and record them.
So, like, when you say, like, paraphrase, does that mean, like, not shorten them, like, to make it, like, just to write it?
Yep. So how that can be done easily is that you will write your statement down yourself on a Post-it note. So what we're going to do when we get to this is have a person say their response, like what your idea is to the group, and then that same person's going to write it down on a Post-it note so that you're not getting paraphrased in a sense because that's the way we're going to do it rather than me writing it. But you're going to vocalize it. Why would it be important to vocalize it out loud to the group, your idea? Making a connection so that they know where you're at, and then you take the time to write it down, and then we start to move on from there. All right, we'll call it a day there. You want me to